Welcome everyone to Gbelaruge. My name is Mobolaji, and with me today are Malik and Nnenna. Today we'll be discussing about the Madagascar Affair. But before we go into that, I would like Malik and Nnenna to introduce themselves.
Hello, my name is Malik, and thank you very much, Mobolaji, for having me today. Um, I'm a PhD research fellow at the University of Bonn, Germany, and in cultural studies. And my focus currently, or my project, is based on gender and intersectionality within the Yoruba society.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Generally, my interests focus on transcultural studies. That is how history, culture, knowledge production and practices affect our um, daily lives, and then how these significant, and also in the current days of science and technology, how these relate together and the significant and function to us and our society as a whole.
Thank you
Yeah.
very much.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to this forum. My name is Dr. Nnenna Ezeilo. I'm an otolaryngologist, head and neck surgeon. That's colloquially known as an ear, nose, and throat surgeon. So what does this mean? I have a bachelor's in biology. Then I went on to get my doctor of medicine degree. Then I completed a 5-year training program in ear, nose, and throat surgery.
Awesome. And just a bit about myself, I'm Mobolaji and I'm a lover of knowledge, and I also love African culture, and it is my desire to showcase what is best about us, but to also have the difficult conversations that need to happen for our collective progress as a global community. So the Madagascar Affair is basically concerned with the president of Madagascar, a small African nation in the Indian Ocean, made a proclamation that they had discovered the cure to COVID-19. They made that declaration initially to no response from the global community. After the Africans began to respond back on social media of why aren't you acknowledging what Madagascar is saying, the WHO had to come out and say we welcome all cures, however you'd have to go through tests, to which Madagascar responded no, an European country will not be allowed to go through tests, and so now we are leaving WHO and we call on all African countries to leave WHO. Interesting, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So now, what are your impressions on this particular affair? Start with Nnenna.
Right. Thanks, Mobolaji. So I guess my take on this entire issue is a little different, coming from the medical expertise and also being an African person myself. I cannot stand on top of the roof of my house and proclaim that I have a cure for COVID-19. Expects acknowledgement from the WHO. You know, there are avenues in which medical knowledge and information is disseminated. This is done by aggregating your knowledge in a format of what is your hypothesis, what are the methods that you use, what is your treatment versus placebo, and what are your results. You write this all up in an article and you publish it, even if it's in a journal, online. Give us the data to support the claim that you have made. And this is not just for any African country. This also applies to all European countries. And there's room for everyone to make contributions to COVID-19 because it's a new and ongoing issue. So a lot of the knowledge that we have right now is based on observational studies. People saying for the COVID-19 treatment patients that we had, these are the people that have mild, serious infections. This is how we treated. This is what works. So everybody's sharing knowledge, but they are in this knowledge and writing out in a medical format. Whereas the more scientific studies are still ongoing and may not yield results for several more. Now, so Madagascar is certainly welcome to say that their tonic, the COVID-19 organics, is an immune booster that can help prevent a variety of infections. But when they make a bold claim, such as this will specifically prevent and cure COVID-19, then of course, we as members of the international community, we want some data, we want some evidence to back up this claim.
I Well, I would not say I totally agree with Nina, but I agree with her to some extent. But we should also remember um, how is Africa looked at from the Western perspective? How do the West look at Africa in the first place? Do they look at a continent where knowledge can come from? I think no. Rather, they look at a continent whereby, okay, they are good at culture, they can produce culture, and they see us just nothing beyond that. So they do not see anything scientific from coming from Africa. And we have seen this. We have 1001 examples about this. So I think we should also look into this. I'm not a scientist and I cannot say much about this, but I can actually talk about what I've seen on social media. How has the WHO tried to carry out tests? Have they gone to Madagascar and the Madagascar the government has sent them away? Have they made any effort to do this? And besides, we've heard it from news that Madagascar government are also calling on South Africa to bring their laboratory or to take samples of this and take it to the South African what do you call it laboratory and do tests about this because South Africa is believed to have a better medical system or laboratory system in comparison to Madagascar. They have agreed to do this, and also the Madagascar government also showed the ingredients of this herbs they produce. So I think we should also see them from this perspective. But overall, I would still say that there is this some discrepancy towards this solution coming from Madagascar, because yes, and like Nnenna also mentioned that they should see that boosting immune system or something like that. This also has to do with the language because we cannot just generalize something from a kind of because science now is being generalized and the interpretation of it comes from the West. How do these people generalize things? How do they call what name do they call diseases? What name do they call infections? I think we should also look into this and see how to come together in the middle point. Yeah, let me just leave it for in that case for now, and I will continue later.
Awesome. So I'm very curious because I know that people have said, for example, I'm Yoruba, and I've heard people say, the Yorubas have had a system to deal with pandemics across the culture. However, of course, these systems were destroyed during the colonization and, of course, post-colonial Nigeria. And now we are dealing with a pretty contemporary pandemic, which is that technology in itself has sped up and affected the way the virus has moved across the world. So how would you go about really understanding kind of what a young African might think looking at the situation and who might see things that say, my ancestors had a way of dealing with pandemics. Why aren't those ways being used in engaging with this particular pandemic? Why isn't it even part of the conversation? Who would like to start, Nnenna or Malik?
I think I would like to come in here. You mentioned because you made mention of ancestors, but we also remember that what did these ancestors do, and how have they been regarded by the Africans themselves, let alone the West? There are so many means they've tried to create. Of course, we even hear of European travelers into into the African continent, and they fell sick and they were easily cured or healed by the Africans, that is, the ancestors of the Africans. But later, of course, we also know that this is very political. Africans were told that they were very barbaric and so on, and this, and they didn't have knowledge, they didn't have culture, they didn't have politics. As a matter of fact, recently, I think it was last year, when the Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, was trying to ask for aid from the parliament for some African countries. Her conversation started with these people had no political system, that their political system is still at baby's level, at infant level, that is not developed. So we need to help them. But of course, I'm not saying that she meant bad for them. Probably she meant well for them, but she still sees them as people who are still not matured. And many of us in Africa actually, when we go to Western world, we feel this, we are being treated this way, that okay, he grew up from an immature cultural system or way of life. So we need to show him or her the advanced system. So, and some of us actually internalize this mentality that okay, we never had civilization. And even when you go to Twitter and other form of social media, you hear some Africans say, okay, point a finger to one technology that Africa has produced. They always say it. But when I read some of the, what do you call it, just yesterday, I was just reading about a Yoruba, what do you call it, that if a somebody like kind of monarch dies beside a river, they have to bury the person inside the river. But they don't throw the person inside water. What they do is that they block the water from flowing on this side, on the other side. That's a form of dike. And then they dug ground, buried the monarch, and then cover it, and then allow the river to flow again.
Fascinating.
And in the 19th century also, many Europeans have visited Yoruba region. Almost every town, in fact, every town had a wall surrounding it. Behind the wall is ditches, canals, that some of them river flow around the town, and it was artificially made. But today, we don't believe that. Some of us don't believe that this is happening. So I think whilst we are being told this is what we were, we should also look at our government, our system. What are we being taught at school? We are being taught that, okay, this is, it was the white man that came to show us the way. So you see a new generation growing up, having this mentality. Talk about our current affairs. Who detected River Niger? It was Mungo Park, because River Niger was never there. It was Mungo Park that came and saw it. The people who were living beside it never saw it.
Really?
So all of this, we need to understand this. But when you go to Mungo Park's diary, he wrote it there that the people drove him there to show him that, oh, come and see where the water actually comes from. But when we are writing our current affairs, we remove all those things. We say he detected the river. So we should also see that we don't see knowledge from ourselves. And when we don't see knowledge from ourselves, we still look at it that, okay, they have to stamp every form of knowledge we are trying to produce, even though we've been producing some of these things for thousands of years. But now, if you want to reproduce it, they have to stamp it. So this is where the problem comes from. And I think, let me try to propose a solution. We should do more from our own perspective. We should translate and interpret the word from our own perspective. But then we also need to develop all this knowledge.
Translate and interpret which word?
To interpret what?
You said interpret the world. Oh.
We need to interpret our own world from our perspective. Okay. So virus, disease, there is no notion, there is no way you can say that Africa didn't know that virus and disease existed. And when you study some of this African society, we have traditional doctors, traditional herbalists who actually specialized in this aspect. They deal with herbs and observe all their life. So we cannot say they didn't have it, but we need to develop them. And that has to be done by us. We need to recognize it. And then, yeah, anybody who cares to understand it, they could. If they don't, we don't really mind. But nobody will tell them to do. China never tried to convince anybody. No. But look at it today. There is no technology you produce in any part of the world that China doesn't have a hand in it. How did it happen? So we need to also think from this way. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Malik. Nnenna, do you have anything to say to that question?
Yes, I agree with the spirit of Malik's comments, and I would certainly like to point out to the young African that you cannot allow people with racist agendas whose primary goal is to subvert and exploit your society to define you. So why should you look to, the West for knowledge? Our society have always had knowledge. Unfortunately, some of this was not recorded, and some of that was lost because this knowledge was passed orally. So for example, Igbo societies, families were organized in walled compounds with a watchtower. Communities were organized amongst gender and age-related groups, where the women would keep the community clean and the men would cut down trees to clear the paths. There was entertainment. There were festivals to celebrate a yield. People knew how to store their food. They stored yams, barns. They smoked their fishes. So people have been doing this, for a long time. So it's absolutely disingenuous that you expect the European settler who is there to exploit your people to accurately record what they see. They are going to record it based on their racist agendas and goal, which is to exploit you. If you want to enslave someone, you have to prove that they are less than you and make up information to do that.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So actually, we have about 4 more minutes left in our show, and I just wanted to ask, I guess, have you both kind of speak on how would you, because Nena mentioned documentation, and I think on like almost like an African documentation that needs to happen. How would you both kind of think about just quickly how this African-led documentation process can start, or which is already happening, I know, in arts and culture, but I've not really seen much in science, but I'm not in the sciences. So even Nena, you might know what is happening with regards to archiving and documentation in that realm. And I am currently interested, and that's the process I'm involved in right now. So what do you guys think need to happen to ensure that we begin to build the right foundation for these knowledge infrastructure that is critical to science and technology in African context, innovation and creativity in African context? Yes.
Should I start or should we?
Any of you can start. If you'd like to start, Malik, that's definitely very fine.
Okay, thank you. What I would suggest is that we know that education, when you want to do documentation or to development or become innovative, it begins with education.
Mm-hmm.
South Korea actually did something like that. They knew what they had and what they didn't have, and they realized they had to invest more in education. I think, let me just focus on Nigeria, for example. If you look at Nigeria today, an average Nigeria cannot use language properly. When they speak English, many of them don't even speak correct English. Somebody was telling me he was speaking American accent, but I had to actually ask because he was actually speaking something else, and definitely not American accent. Now, when it comes to indigenous language, people also don't, many people are shying away from indigenous languages or regional languages. Why? They believe that it makes them look local. So I think we should look within rather than looking without. And how do we look within? We need to also integrate different kind of knowledges. We shouldn't measure our education system on, okay, this is somebody that's actually able to read and write in English. That's the person that has knowledge. We should also, from elementary schools, we should begin to tap on different forms of knowledges. That's number one. Number two, we need to also look at people who are not associated with schools but have this knowledge. For example, we have many people who can produce different kinds of herbs that they have learned, because in Africa, knowledge is transferred through lineage and through training. Lineage, you get trained, and we have society whereby who have had this continuation for almost for hundreds of years. We should try to tap into some of these herbs and try to collect them and develop them further. But we have to can do these things. So we should not measure knowledge in the kind of comparative way of saying that you have to have a bachelor's degree, you have to have a master's degree. We need to also, of course, that is good, but we should also look at those ones that have a specific talent or specific knowledge, but are not we should look at how to integrate them into the society and preserve them. For example, a botanic garden should be created, a laboratory should be created, and laboratory should have different sections, whereby we have the traditional ones and then we have the so-called modern ones. So we need to see, there should be a kind of conversation going on between the two.
Like a bridging, an encounter needs to happen.
Exactly. So this, yes, these have to meet. And also, when we talk about what else can I talk about? Technology. We should also see some of these things that are produced locally and see what we have. Like a bamboo stick can produce so many things and it's very environmental friendly. We have many other things that we can do to use to develop our society. So knowledge should not be limited to only what they call it, what we see or what we see on social media, and then we want to do a photocopy of it. We should also see knowledge, what we can produce, and develop it further. I think that will help a little bit.
Thank you so much, Malik. Nnenna, do you have um, some proposal?
Right, certainly. I think, local solutions are best for local problems because the locals can describe to you best what their challenges are and create unique solutions to address them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in terms of archiving our knowledge and investing in that area of local technologies and innovation, we really have to address the basics first and foremost. Do we have food? Do you have water? Access to healthcare? Do you have a good education? Is it helpful if I have, the cure to COVID? How do you expect, a country to have a cure to COVID organics when, a woman cannot deliver a baby safely and maternal mortality is high? So now you lose the mother and you lose that income and you lose that um, influence in a child's lives. So we really have to attend to our basics and to allow us to go into our different endeavors. Because if you have a food on your table, a roof over your head, electricity, then you can actually go out and interact with your environment and focus on creating new areas of knowledge. Most of our grandparents grew up in communities where they grew their own food. We don't do that anymore. And you turn around, and urban communities in the US are talking about community gardens because they're food deserts. So who is primitive? And when we were organized in our own rural communities, we had some communities. We were not creating a lot of waste and environmentally unfriendly things. But when we organize in cities that are poorly planned and you have slums, then you have situations where people are dumping into streams and rivers and exposing themselves to diseases. So we really have to rethink how we want to organize our society and go back to the basics so that if people have food, shelter, and health wherever they are in Nigeria, then they can stay within their communities and build on that knowledge. And they don't have to go and aggregate in the city to do that. And we also have to look to our neighbors who have also done it. We know that Ethiopia has a very long history of recording, so we should be able to fund grants for other African peoples to go out to countries like Ethiopia and study and see how they've been able to record their history since before the ancient times.
So I will respond to that quickly and say that there have been different ways that cultures have recorded history and have recorded information. And I feel like that in itself is a tenuous situation because I, as a Yoruba woman, know that my ancestors used to record information using textiles. So these textiles are not just patterns, they're also, maybe not even this one, but like the ones that were being made by my ancestors were actual records of things that happened, that actual records of how the world, an understanding of their world. There's also the oral tradition, so the oriki and the oral histories that were there. And there's even also haircuts to tell you about the age a person was, what their family was about, and gives you information. So I do know that in a contemporary sense, because literacy is quite critical to move to how information is engaged, there should be a documentation process. But I also feel like we must honor the fact that there were documentation processes that were very effective pre-colonially that might not have been able to survive the onslaught of Western supremacy, white supremacy against African ways of being. So we have run out of time. Thank you both so much for the knowledge you shared. I'm sure that this will help a number of people get some more understanding on the situation rather than staying on the surface and coming from a place of emotion, which I understand fully. But the thing is, these are not emotional situations. These are actual real life questions. So again, thank you so much. And thank you all for listening. And we will see you again next week for another episode of Gbelaruge. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.